Now, the only way we're able to fund the federal government right now, and increasingly to pay the Social Security checks, is by borrowing from largely China. And President Obama says we're going to borrow $9 trillion in debt in the next 9 or 10 years. Now that means we're going to double the national debt in 9 or 10 years, started by President Bush, continued in a massive extent by President Obama, such that we will double in these 9 or 10 years the national debt from the time the Republic was founded, in which we fought a few expensive wars, including Vietnam, North Korea, World Wars I and II. And yet, in this coming 9 years, we're going to double the national debt. Now, to give you the image I use at this point for America for Sale, I want you to consider the following. Maybe in 2010, the Social Security checks ought to have printed on the bottom a little addendum that says, brought to you courtesy of the government of Communist China. Because they're paying your Social Security benefits. In fact, I've even got a better idea. Henry Paulson, Goldman Sachs, made millions of dollars outsourcing jobs to China, for which he got appointed Secretary of the Treasury, and he continued outsourcing jobs. So why don't we eliminate the middleman? Let's outsource Social Security Administration to China. Let's pack it all up and send it there. And the Chinese, of course, can hire people more cheaply, as they do always, to administer Social Security, and the checks can come directly from Beijing. Why bother bypassing through Washington? It's needless and it can be done cheaper. Now that's the predicament we're in. And the only way we're running the federal government is through the good graces of Communist China. And China has notified the United States they're not interested in doing this for very long. Now, I don't know about you, but in my life it's never worked very well for me to owe people money I couldn't pay back. People don't take kindly to that. And then they especially don't take kindly to you asking you, well, I'll pay you back if you could lend me some more. And that's what we're doing to China. And China said they're tired of it. China said, we don't want any more US dollar denominated debt. China has proposed that China, by the way, has doubled its gold purchases in the last 6 months, and China has now proposed that we create an international dollar that is an alternative to the US dollar for world trade. Because see, China doesn't want to end up with, currently China has $2 trillion of foreign exchange reserves, about 80% of it in dollar assets, and if we keep printing money, the dollar is going to devalue, and China doesn't want to get holding the bag where their accumulated foreign exchange assets are depreciating because the dollar is depreciating. We're headed towards hyperinflation, and China knows it. So China wants a one world currency created through the International Monetary Fund in order to replace the dollar in international trade and not to have to take so many dollars into the future. Besides, China's notified the Treasury they're not going to begin purchasing as many Treasury securities unless, of course, we dramatically raise interest rates. So get ready, we're probably headed back to the 1970s. High interest rates, depreciating dollar, increasing energy and food costs, stagflation, inflation, but a stagnant economy in which 10% unemployment may look normal. Now, I write a chapter called Meet the Globalists, because I wanted to define exactly that the reason we're in this predicament is because of the globalists. And this does not have to be a conspiracy theory. We don't have to go any further than Henry Kissinger. I quote him in the beginning of the book. He wrote a commentary in the International Herald Tribune where Kissinger said, echoing Rahm Emanuel, don't let any good crisis go to waste, Kissinger said, look, President Obama ought to use this economic crisis to create a new world order. And Kissinger again published those exact words. What Kissinger meant was, we have an international economy, so we need international governance of that economy. The globalists have always thought this way. If the economy becomes global, then the politics will become global. And the reason is, just think for a second, as I wrote about the North American Union, which everyone denied. By the way, there's a very important article I published today on WorldNet Daily. Thomas DeKino, who is probably the most influential lobbyist in Canada in the last 3 or 4 decades. He's head of the equivalent of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. He admitted finally in an interview that to create the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America was his idea. And he took it to the Council on Foreign Relations, where the Council on Foreign Relations bought the idea, created the task force on the future of North America, which was headed, Robert Pastor, I call the father of the North American Union, authored their report. And this then was able to be used to convince President Bush to agree to the Security and Prosperity Partnership. So it was always a plan advanced by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and now we have the direct evidence to prove that. When I read a chapter called Meet the Globalists, one of the globalists is Robert Mundell. Anyone ever heard Robert Mundell's name? Very few people know who he is. He's a very influential economist at Columbia. But he's not just an academic. He's considered the father of the euro. Robert Mundell won a Pulitzer Prize a Nobel Prize in 1999 for arguing that an optimum currency area was not a country. In other words, an optimum currency area was a trade area. Translated, the United States of America is an anachronism. Worn out, old, like George Soros says, one of those ideas that was only relevant when kings had castles. And so therefore, because the dollar does not represent a trade area, it's not an optimum currency area, it's got to die. And this has been echoed by the Council on Foreign Relations, Ben Steele, one of their chief economists, who's published the identical idea. Now, Robert Mundell wants the International Monetary Fund to use their special drawing rights to create an alternative to the dollar on the international trade scene. And Mundell is advising China. China has proposed Robert Mundell's idea to the G20. And guess who's agreed to it? President Barack Obama. At the G20 meeting in London in April, and I write about it again, this was occurring as I was writing America for Sale, and I document what I'm talking about here with footnotes referencing Robert Mundell's works. The G20 meeting in April had a communique at the end which agreed to fund for the G20 nations $250 billion to the International Monetary Fund to get the liquidity needed so these special drawing rights could be created for countries to use them instead of holding dollars when they engage in international trade. And President Obama agreed to the final communique. So if you can believe it, the White House is now publicly engaging in a plan to subvert the dollar internationally. And it's on the public record. If you want to see it documented, go to the G20's website, g20.org. On the right-hand side, you'll see London Communique. Click that. Read point 5. Point 5 of the London Communique documents the funding to the International Monetary Fund and specifies $250 billion that will be used for these special drawing rights. What does this mean? I wrote a chapter called The Death of the Dollar, the plan to destroy the dollar.